What is the scariest, oh hell no experience you've had? When I was around 10 years old, I woke up early one morning, probably around 7 a.m., before anyone else in the house was up. The world was still quiet, and I saw my chance for a little solo adventure. I decided to sneak out to the pool without telling anyone. The water was cool and still as I stepped in, 1 foot after the other, until I was waist deep. That's when I saw it, an alligator silently floating at the far end of the pool, watching me. One early morning, as I was leaving a hotel, a man followed me out to my car. Sensing something off, I jumped in and locked the doors in one motion, the doors slamming shut just as I hit the seat. He knocked on my window, and I cracked it open no more than 2 inches. He claimed I'd dropped a key in the parking lot and urged me to get out and retrieve it. But I saw through him. It was a ploy. I locked eyes with him and firmly said no, not me. He understood exactly what I meant. He wasn't getting to me. I wasn't scared. I was furious. I pulled away fast and got on the interstate, hoping to leave the encounter behind. But in the thick of 5-lane traffic, he came flying up behind me. Just as it looked like he might rear-end me, he swerved sharply into another lane, weaving between cars and nearly causing a pileup. I never got his license plate. I left too quickly, focused on putting distance between us. And I never stayed at that hotel again on any trip down that route. I stepped into the elevator on the 8th floor of a hotel and pressed the button for the 10th. Just as the doors were about to close, a crowd, at least 15 people, pushed their way in, packing the small space far beyond capacity. I found myself wedged in the back corner, barely able to move. The sign clearly stated a limit of 10 adults. Instead of rising, the elevator hesitated, then began to descend. Slowly at first, then suddenly, terrifyingly, it dropped. We were in free fall for what felt like an eternity, but in reality, it was about 2 floors. Then, jolt, the emergency cable caught us. I honestly thought I was going to die in that elevator. That moment has never left me. Back when I was regularly working the night shift, I had completely flipped my sleep schedule, waking up around 7 p.m. every day. It worked for the most part, except for the occasional grocery run at 10 p.m. That wouldn't have been so bad if I could drive, but I have epilepsy, so I legally can't. That meant I had to bike everywhere, usually with a podcast in my ears to keep me company. One night, after a grocery trip, I was biking back home. My house sits at the end of one of those long, rural driveways you hear about in creepy stories. Except it's not actually creepy. Just quiet, tucked back in the woods, and definitely isolated. I've ridden that road so many times I'm used to wildlife darting out. Deer, raccoons, whatever. But that night felt off. I was almost home when something jumped out into the driveway ahead of me. I stopped and waited, assuming it was another deer. They're everywhere and not exactly known for being smart. But then my bike light caught its eyes, and the reflection was much too low to the ground to be a deer. My next thought, probably one of the coyotes we've seen around the yard. I pulled out my headphones and cranked the music on my Lumia 635 as loud as it would go. I even stomped around a bit, trying to scare it off. I pointed my light straight at it, and it didn't move. Just stood there, staring at me. Then, slowly, it lowered its body and began creeping toward me. That's when I knew. This wasn't a deer, and it definitely wasn't a coyote or someone's dog. It was a mountain lion, and it was stalking me. I didn't run, but I carefully backed out of the driveway, never breaking eye contact. The second I was clear, I turned my bike around and hauled it down the hill toward my job, the only place open at that hour and close enough to reach fast. At that point, I wasn't 100% sure it was a mountain lion, just that it wasn't anything familiar, and it wasn't acting like a curious animal. It was acting like a predator. But then, as I reached the top of the hill and looked back, I saw it, another one, or maybe the same one, perched on a rock wall barely 4 feet from me, watching. It usually takes me 30 minutes to bike to work. That night, I did it in 10. I was home alone one afternoon when I suddenly heard footsteps on the roof. Not creaks or random noises, actual deliberate footsteps. My heart stopped. I froze, every horror movie I'd ever seen flashing through my mind. For a second, I genuinely thought I was about to be in one. I was seconds away from calling 911 when I got a text from my mom. Forgot to mention, the roofers are coming by today. Thanks, Mom. I was about 11 or 12, in a public restroom with a few stalls. I had just sat down when the woman in the next stall asked if I could pass her some toilet paper. Sure, no problem. I thought, we've all been there. When I passed it under the divider, her index finger lingered on mine as she took the paper. I didn't think anything of it. It was an awkward reach. I finished up, flushed, and stepped out to wash my hands. As I started scrubbing, she emerged from her stall. She looked like a normal woman in her 40s, someone's mom. She began washing her hands, locking eyes with me in the mirror. It was only about 3 seconds, but I distinctly remember her smile subtly shifting from generic to something darker. It's hard to explain, but I suddenly felt like she wanted to eat me. Every possible spot of skin that could get goosebumps stood to attention. My instinct screamed to get out of that bathroom, so I bolted. It could have been nothing, perhaps just a dramatic childish projection, but I swear that woman was going to chew on me. My dad loves to tell this story about his oh god no moment. He's lived in a small village near Bristol, UK, his whole life, and I grew up there too. It's close to a main road and has a great pub in the center, a second home for all the locals. One night in the late 80s, Dad and his friends were at a lock-in at the pub. The main road had recently been closed for resurfacing, diverting all traffic and many new faces through the village. Around 12:30 a.m., everyone was pretty merry when there was a knock at the door. It was one of the new guys who occasionally came in from out of town, utterly white, breathless, and trembling. The landlord invited him in, sat him down, offered a drink, and asked what on earth had happened. "I've just run over some poor girl," he stammered. The pub went silent. It's a close-knit community, and no one wanted to hear that one of their own had been hit. People started firing questions. "Who did you hit? Is she badly hurt? Where is this?" It was on the main road, where they just did the roadworks. "I don't know who it was, and I can't find her. I checked everywhere," he said. I think she must still be under the car." Everyone then realized he hadn't driven to the pub. He'd apparently left his car on the main road and run there. Panic does strange things to people. Quickly, a half dozen locals headed out to the roadwork site while the landlord called emergency services. No mobile phones back then. They found the car, headlights on, driver's side door open, sitting in the road at the end of very long tire marks. They checked the verges, the road, and even under the car. Nothing. Someone pointed out that the car was pristine, showing no signs of impact. They drove the car back to the pub and told the shaken driver he hadn't hit anyone. "But I saw her and heard her hit the car," he insisted. Someone asked how fast he was going to make such long skid marks. He looked ashamed before admitting 70, maybe 80. That's double the speed limit. Everyone eventually chalked it up to him being tired, and he spent the night at the pub. 2 weeks later, it happened again. Another driver insisted they'd hit a girl late at night on the main road, but there was no sign of an accident. A month after that, it happened again. For the next year or so, people kept coming into that pub at night, convinced they'd run someone over. The village had itself a ghost story. It turns out there was an explanation. It only happened late at night, exactly where the roadworks were, and usually when the driver was speeding. The girl was the "please drive carefully through our village" sign, half covered in ivy. You'd hit the newly resurfaced part of the road, the car would go bump, and the headlights would illuminate her at the same time. If you weren't paying attention, she looked just like a teenage girl in a dark skirt. They only figured this out after someone actually ran over the sign, which was then moved. The ghost sightings stopped after that, but my dad and his friends still love telling the story. I recently moved away from the north, specifically from an area known for being heavily infested with ticks during certain seasons. One day, I pulled a huge tick off my dog, grabbed an old shoe, and flattened the disgusting thing. When I lifted the shoe, I noticed a disturbing sight, a good amount of blood moving strangely. On closer inspection, I realized it was filled with tiny, microscopic baby ticks wriggling around. That gave me one of the most intense, oh hell no feelings I've ever experienced. I ended up torching the concrete for about a minute straight, which thankfully took care of the situation. As a community service volunteer at the local hospital, one of my duties was to deliver food menus to every patient early in the morning, starting my round around 5 or 6 a.m. The first floor was ICU, and it was still quite dark at that hour. I walked into a patient's room. All the blinds were shut, and the only light came from the medical equipment she was hooked up to. Unsure if she was awake, I announced myself and waited for a response. Sometimes patients needed help making meal choices, so I'd stick around. After a few seconds, seeing her eyes still closed, I assumed she was asleep and started to head for the door. Halfway out with my back to her, I heard her say, "Make sure they don't follow you out." I froze. Slowly, I turned around. Her eyes were still closed. I quickly ran out of there. There was no one else in that room. I was working a coffee shop when one of the baristas went to clean the bathroom. A few minutes later, I hear her let out a loud eep. She rushes over, eyes wide, and tells me there's a weird-looking spider in there and that I have to deal with it. I'm in a bug, so I get kind of excited, thinking I'm about to rescue some cool little critter and release it outside. I walk in the bathroom, ready for a spider. It wasn't a spider. It was a scorpion. When I was 12, I flew alone from Sacramento to Anchorage to visit my aunt. There was a 3-hour layover at Seattle-Tacoma. Technically, you had to be 13 to fly unaccompanied, but my birthday was just a few months away, so my parents told me to lie if anyone asked. Oddly enough, for how overprotective they usually were, they didn't seem to think this solo journey was a big deal. At Seattle-Tacoma, I noticed a man watching me. Memory is unreliable, but I remember him being tall, maybe in his 40s, with an appearance I couldn't quite place. At 12, I was clueless and wildly naive. I thought I was basically an adult because if I wasn't, why would I be flying to Alaska on my own? So, I decided the man must think I looked hot. I was wearing what I thought were very fashionable clothes, and I convinced myself that only older men had the sophistication to appreciate me. I was bitter that boys my own age didn't like me, and I mistook attention for validation. He ended up on the same flight, sitting one row back and across the aisle. I kept glancing over, and it felt like he was watching me. Instead of being alarmed, I felt flattered. I put on my headphones and tuned out the rest. When we landed in Anchorage, I forgot all about him while trying to find my aunt. She wasn't there. I didn't have a cell phone. She didn't either. So I wandered the airport, got a snack, and sat around waiting. After about an hour, I finally used a payphone to call her house and left a message. When I hung up, the man was suddenly right there, standing next to me. He asked if I was okay, if I was lost. His accent was unfamiliar. I still don't know where he might have been from. I told him I couldn't find my aunt. He said maybe she was waiting outside, since sometimes people had to pull into the pickup lane. He offered his arm and said he'd walk me out just to be sure I got there safely. I started walking with him. But then, just as we reached the main lobby, I saw my aunt. She'd been looking for me, but hadn't been able to get past security. I turned to tell the man I was fine and to thank him. But he was gone. Just gone. I thought I saw someone who looked like him heading quickly up an escalator, but I wasn't sure. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe he really was trying to help a kid who looked lost and scared. I want to believe that. But the way he vanished the second another adult showed up, it chilled me. Even now, I feel uneasy remembering it. Sometimes I feel guilty about how much the memory unsettles me. I worry that the strangeness I assigned to him, his accent, how I couldn't place his ethnicity, makes me question whether I'm being unfair or prejudiced. But that moment when he disappeared, it dropped like a stone in my stomach. I don't know what would have happened if I'd gone outside with him. Maybe nothing. Probably nothing. But I'm really, really glad I didn't find out. I was in my early 20s, out on my final driving lesson before taking the test for my probationary license. We were coming around a bend beneath a freeway. Everything normal until it wasn't. Out of nowhere, a car came flying up behind us, going at least 160 kilometers per hour in a 90 zone, about 100 miles per hour where the limit was closer to 55. It slammed into the rear driver's side of our car with full force. We spun out of control. The car skidded, twisted, and smashed straight into an underpass. Somehow, my instructor and I both survived. We were both seriously injured, but considering the speed and the impact, we were impossibly lucky to be alive at all. I was in the ER with a severe case of pneumonia, so bad that at one point, I had 4 staff in my cubicle for nearly an hour straight trying to figure out what was wrong. I'd originally gone to urgent care and sat in the waiting room for 45 minutes. The moment they triaged me, they immediately sent me to the ER. Not a great sign. After an intense hour with up to 10 people working on me at once, I had IVs in both arms, and then suddenly everyone was gone. Just me, alone in the room, drifting in and out of consciousness thanks to dangerously low oxygen levels. Then came the plot twist. I was allergic to one of the antibiotics they'd given me. By the time I realized what was happening, my hands and wrists were so swollen I couldn't press the call button. So there I was, frantically flailing my ballooned up arms at the equipment, hoping to set off something. Eventually, someone came in. It took them about 30 seconds to figure out I was having an anaphylactic reaction. But those 30 seconds? Easily among the longest of my life. I couldn't talk, couldn't move much, couldn't breathe properly, and had gone from pneumonia level bad to, oh cool, this might actually kill me in record time. Silver lining? At least I knew it was anaphylaxis, not just some mysterious, terrifying new twist in whatever fresh hell my body had signed up for. It was midnight in December, and my friends and I were playing manhunt in the woods behind their house. No good reason to be outside, especially with snow blanketing everything. As I was walking along, I came across this rundown cabin. More like a crack house, honestly. That's when I heard it, the faint squeaking of a swing set, slowly moving back and forth in the cold night air. I whispered to my friend, "What is that?" Dead silence. The swing stopped creaking the instant I stopped talking. I'm not exactly known for my speed, but that night, I swear I broke every land speed record in history. I worked for a food delivery service, and one night around 10:30 p.m., I had to drive about 2 miles down a narrow one-way road lined with banks on both sides. If another car came the other way, I wouldn't be able to turn around and would have to back all the way to a driveway. The houses around were pretty scattered, and every driveway was at least 100 yards from the house itself. I noticed all this on the way in, naturally staying on high alert since I'm a woman delivering late at night. When I got to the address, it was an abandoned house, no lights, driveway blocked off with boards, and my skin immediately crawled. The road dead-ended there, and the closest house was about 700 or 800 yards away. I locked my doors and called the customer. They said they were in a trailer across the street and would come out to meet me. There was no trailer across the street. Instead, a guy appeared out of a dirt trail and started walking toward my car. As he got closer, he asked if I could wait about 5 minutes for his friend to come back with a tip for me. The bill was already paid. Politely, but firmly, I said no. I had to get back to work. Right then, his phone rang. I heard him say, "Yeah, bro, can we make this happen? Are you on the road or what?" I placed the food on the ground, said goodbye, and peeled out of there so fast I'm pretty sure I kicked up a dust storm. That night taught me to trust my gut above all else, and to never worry about a tip. Maybe I was paranoid, but honestly, I think I got lucky. When I was 11, my family and I were traveling around Rajasthan. Parents, aunt and uncle, cousins, grandparents, the whole crew. One afternoon, during lunch at our hotel, I got into a fight with my aunt and stormed out, feeling upset and alone. Right by the hotel entrance was a small play area with swings and a slide. Since it was lunchtime, it was completely empty. I ran over and sat on the swings, stewing in silence. After a little while, a man in his 30s came over and sat on the swing beside me. I was just a naive kid, missing my friends back home and with no one else to talk to about the fight. So when he started asking questions about my family, I told him everything, more than I probably should have. He asked if I was hungry since I'd missed lunch. When I said yes, he told me he had food in his private cottage behind the hotel, fancier than our rooms, and invited me to eat with him there. I was curious, and this close to saying yes when my mom showed up. The man bolted immediately, probably saw her coming and didn't want to get caught. Mom sat where he'd been and asked who the man was. I told her he was my new friend and that he'd invited me to his fancy cottage for lunch. Oh, 11-year-old me was so clueless. Mom gave me a serious lecture about stranger danger, took me back inside, and reported the man to reception. I was heavily watched for the rest of the trip. It wasn't until years later that I realized the guy probably spotted a lonely kid in the play area and saw me as an easy target. When I was about 17, I lived in a house with a backyard that backed right onto the woods. Most of my memories from those woods were good. Peaceful hikes, quiet afternoons. But there were always a few strange moments I couldn't explain when I wandered too far in. As I got older, I noticed something unsettling. After 5 p.m., the woods seemed to change. If I stared too long into the trees, I could feel it like something was staring right back at me. At night, we'd hear eerie screams coming from the forest. We told ourselves it was just cougars or foxes, but honestly, their cries sounded disturbingly like a woman screaming. Footsteps on the gravel outside were almost nightly too, but again, we wrote it off as wildlife. One night, around 8 p.m., I went out to my car to pick up my sibling from a friend's place. I sat in the car for a few seconds, connecting my phone to the AUX cord so I could play some music. It was quiet, just crickets chirping loudly in the background. The car wasn't on yet, so I could hear everything. Then, suddenly, everything stopped. The crickets went silent. The wind died down, no rustling leaves. The world felt like it held its breath. I froze. I listened, hoping I was imagining things. Except how do you imagine complete silence? I looked to my right, toward the woods, and an intense wave of dread washed over me. It was so strong, I was paralyzed, staring at the shadowed entrance. I could feel, without a doubt, something was watching me. Chills raced down my spine, and cold fear seeped in. Then, faintly, I heard the unmistakable crunch of gravel, someone walking behind my car. It circled around, but I couldn't see anything in the mirrors. I stayed frozen until the crunching reached my side. Every instinct screamed at me, "Get out." I started the car and floored it. No matter how fast I drove away, I couldn't bring myself to look back. It felt like something was watching my back, even from a distance. I told my parents, but as usual, they didn't believe me. They accused me of trying to scare my younger siblings. We moved a few months later, but I could never look at those woods the same way again. And every time I heard gravel crunch at night, you could bet I was out of my room and into my siblings, safe, at least for a little while. I was sitting on my couch, watching TV, when I noticed the silhouettes of three men approaching my front door. One of them had a gun drawn. They knocked, but I stayed quiet, clutching my crappy little shotgun. They started banging louder, probably trying to see if anyone was home. Then they pulled out a crowbar and began prying the door open. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, the men were gone. What chills me to this day, those same guys have been standing right next to a broken window the entire time, watching, waiting. I became involved with someone who, as it turned out, had a history of domestic violence. He initially explained it away, saying his ex knew how to push his buttons and he'd smacked her after a bad day at work. Later, he claimed he'd even attempted suicide because he didn't want to become like his abusive father. Fast forward in their relationship, and she eventually left with a moving truck while he was at work. He called her a cunt for it and tried to sue her for items she allegedly took, plus her half of unpaid rent for breaking their lease. While he never physically harmed me, the emotional abuse escalated to the point where I no longer use the term gaslighting lightly. He did it so frequently that I began to question my own sanity. I finally blocked his number and reached out to his ex. I essentially asked her how she managed to get away from him and stay safe. We chatted, and it turned out she had filed 2 police reports, one for physical assault and another for fear for her life because he had been planning to kill her. Interestingly, she said nothing about his suicide attempt, which, based on his account, would have occurred while they were still living together. After our conversation, I had a dental appointment. As I sat in the waiting room, the news on the TV was reporting on the alarming frequency of domestic violence victims being murdered by their abusers. Unfortunately, he knows where I live and work. I've considered getting a restraining order, but if it were granted, it could lead to him being fired. And if he lost his job, he might blame me, depending on what he's told people. That could make things significantly worse. While I was in Iraq, I lived in an old Saddam-era bunker that we were using as a patrol base. The lowest level of the bunker was almost completely flooded with water. About 20 feet from the stairs, we'd set up a makeshift camp toilet, so we wouldn't have to gear up in full body armor every time nature called. One night, around 3 a.m., I was half asleep but had to use that stupid toilet. As I was sitting there, my flashlight suddenly died. In the dark, I could hear water dripping from the ceiling above the flooded floor. Looking back, I knew there was nothing to fear, and I knew I needed fresh batteries. But in that moment, I was absolutely terrified. It turned into one of the fastest bathroom breaks of my life. When I was at university, I lived in a gated apartment complex just a few blocks from campus and 2 blocks from a bar that hosted karaoke on Saturday nights. One particular Saturday, I went out with half a dozen other students from the complex for karaoke, and we had a fantastic time. After many rounds of drinks and songs, around late evening, I and 2 other women decided it was time to call it a night and head back. As we walked through our quiet, dark neighborhood, about 2 blocks in, I noticed some noise behind us. Glancing over my shoulder, I saw an older man keeping pace about 30 feet back. I told my friends, and after they glanced back too, we all agreed. This guy was giving us a very creepy, stalker-like stare. We stopped and turned to face him. Why would he be walking alone in deserted streets, suddenly appearing out of nowhere? The moment he realized we were aware, he crossed to the other side of the street, but kept following the same direction. We kept a close eye on him and quickened our pace, the immediate threat fading as we neared home. Our apartment complex had 2 entrances, and the closer, better lit one was through an alley beside a closed pizza place. We cut across the pizza place's empty parking lot and headed straight to the gate, keys in hand. As we reached the complex wall, the man suddenly made a sharp, right turn across the street and disappear into the alley. That didn't help our nerves. Safe behind the locked gate, we decided to wait in the courtyard for a few minutes, just to be sure he wouldn't try anything. For about 10 minutes, nothing happened, and our adrenaline started to calm. Then, out of nowhere, a shadowed face darted from behind the edge of the gate, quickly vanishing behind a corner. The gate was still locked tight, but this creep had apparently been waiting for a chance to peer through the bars in quick, darting glimpses. That was our final OHLNO. We called the cops, non-emergency line, and waited. While we waited, other residents returned from karaoke and spotted the same guy lurking between the dumpsters near the pizza place. A few of the guys decided to check it out, locking the gate behind them. Again, no way we were letting him in. Neither they nor the police ever found the guy. No satisfying. We figured maybe he was a flasher or some creep, but that didn't explain why he pretended to change course when we spotted him or why he waited outside our complex. Needless to say, we never went to karaoke night again. This might get lost in the shuffle, but I actually have a story that fits, so why not share it? I was on a school trip, staying in the upper room of a church. There was a small fire escape staircase at the back that led down to a clearing, which was surrounded on all sides by thick woods. One night, a friend and I noticed what looked like a phone flashlight flickering in the woods, not moving. Curious, we decided to check it out. We quietly climbed down the fire escape and carefully crossed the clearing, making sure no chaperone saw us. Just as we reached the edge of the forest, the light suddenly went out, and almost immediately, an identical light appeared deeper inside the woods. That was the last straw. I sprinted back to the fire escape with my friend close behind, running faster than I ever have in my life. Looking back, if we had dared to investigate that light any further, I'm not sure we would have ever been seen again. Last week, I started the barbecue and went inside to grab some things. When I came back out, I was shocked to see the entire grill and the top of the propane tank completely engulfed in flames. We hadn't noticed a leak, but apparently there was one. I quickly grabbed some water and managed to douse the flames, putting out the fire before it could cause any real damage. Thankfully, everything was okay in the end, but honestly, I think I'm done BB-cheeing for the year. I was staying alone in a hotel room ahead of a friend's wedding. It was my first time traveling solo, and since the wedding was in San Jose while I live in LA, I was about 8 hours away from home. Around 2 a.m., I suddenly heard someone trying to key in my door and then pounding on it frantically, trying to get in. That was a massive oh hell no moment for me. Luckily, from my experience working in a hotel with staff who were a bit too free with their master keys, I always made sure to engage the deadbolt whenever I was inside. That deadbolt saved me that night. I was so grateful for it. When I was 4 years old, I lived with my grandparents in a house that wasn't fully finished yet. Because of that, bugs and spiders would often find their way into the showers and kitchen. One day, after I finished using the bathroom, I tried to go back outside, but there was a huge snake blocking the way in the kitchen. I couldn't get past it, so all I could do was scream as loud as I could until someone finally heard me. Back in high school, one late night, my best friend and I decided to make a quick run to Walmart. I stopped to get gas first. This was before paying at the pump was even an option, so I went inside with cash. The cashier was a much older, creepy guy who started saying some really unsettling things to me. I got freaked out fast, and we hurried out of the parking lot. On the way out, I hit something with the car, but I kept it to myself and didn't tell my parents. About a week later, my dad noticed the dent. When I finally told him what had happened, he was furious. He grabbed his gun and drove straight to that gas station. The guy wasn't working that day, and my dad was pretty clear. His boss was the luckiest person alive. I actually have two stories. The first one happened when I was in kindergarten. I used to walk to school with some neighborhood kids. Our school was literally less than a block away. One day, though, I had to walk alone because the other kids were either on vacation or sick. As I was walking home, this man pulled up beside me and started driving slowly alongside, asking me to get in, offering me a ride. I kept telling him no, that I was fine, that I lived just down the street, and that my parents were expecting me. But he didn't leave me alone until I got safely into my neighborhood, and then I ran straight home. That whole moment gave me major stranger danger vibes. I still remember how scared I felt and how nothing about him seemed like a good citizen trying to help a kid walking alone. The second happened when I was 16. My mom and I had a flat tire on the interstate, and we didn't have a jack. This was before cell phones were a thing, so we just sat by the side of the road, hoping someone would stop to help. A car pulled up in front of us, and a man got out. He didn't say hello or smile, nothing friendly at all. He had a buck knife on his belt. Anyone from the South or into hunting knows what that means. And as he got closer, his hand went to the knife, and he flipped the holster strap open. Right then, a Jeep full of teenage boys pulled up and stopped between us and the man. The boys jumped out, helped us change the tire, and the creepy guy just turned around and walked away without a word. I was home alone one night around midnight, sitting on the living room floor, chatting on the phone with my best friend. My husband was away on a business trip with my dad. Our house was old, had been lived in by the same woman since she was a girl. Her name was Aunt Glennie, and she was the great aunt of one of my friends. The house still had the room she used, a bedroom off the living room that had been hers, and next to it was another bedroom, ours. So there I was, just one lamp on, a little stoned, talking away on the phone. The dogs were all asleep on the couches, peaceful and quiet. Then, suddenly, all 4 dogs sat up at once, staring intently at the bedroom door off the living room. That door slowly creaked open and then closed again. Right after, the door of the bedroom next to it opened, then closed. It was like someone had walked out of one room and into the other. And just like that, the dogs laid back down and went right back to sleep. Me, I was completely freaked out. I didn't move for the rest of the night, sitting under that single lamp, too scared to do anything. That night was just the beginning of what life with Aunt Glennie's presence would be like. When I was in Mexico, I stayed at a fairly large resort known for its abundant wildlife. Right when we arrived, an employee warned us to be careful around some of the animals on the trails and in the water, spider monkeys, lizards, fish, and so on, since some could be aggressive. The resort was huge, about 6 or 7 square miles, filled with cenotes, gardens, historical artifacts, and other cool spots to explore. Curious, I decided to check out a pre-Hispanic oven they had marked as a historical piece. It was tucked away down a dirt road in the farthest corner of the resort. On my way back, I suddenly found myself face to face with at least 30 lizards. They were lined up, all puffing up their necks, making strange noises, and clearly not happy to see me. The resort staff had warned us to stay on the trails because of dangerous wildlife, but here I was cornered by dozens of these creatures in nothing but wet shorts and sandals. Honestly, how do you even prepare someone for a moment like that? I didn't hesitate. Screw the trails. I sprinted through those woods faster than I ever have before. To this day, I'm not sure what those little lizards wanted from me. When I was about 19 or 20 and living with my parents while in college, one night, I snuck my ex-boyfriend into the house after we'd been out with friends. It was around 1 a.m. He suddenly woke up around 3 a.m., shook me awake, and said something felt off about the house. He always had a bad feeling when staying over. His remarks were strange enough that we talked about it briefly, but I was too tired to argue, so he left. About an hour later, I was jolted awake by loud noises coming from the kitchen. At first, I dismissed it because I had 3 younger brothers at home, a toddler and 2 teens, and my pregnant mom, so I figured it could have been anyone. But after 10 minutes of persistent noise, I started to worry. It seemed unlikely that someone would be making such a racket knowing everyone was asleep. especially the 3-year-old who was a light sleeper and scared of the dark. I texted my mom, who was making all that noise. Then I got up and went to the bathroom across the hall. Opening my bedroom door for the first time since hearing the sounds, I realized the noise was definitely coming from the kitchen, clanging dishes, the fridge opening like someone was preparing food, and it was loud. I was terrified, especially because all the lights downstairs were off. But I tried to rationalize it. Maybe one of the kids was up. When I got back to my room, my mom hadn't replied. Eventually, the noise stopped, and I managed to get back to sleep. Later that morning, I saw a text from my mom sent around 5 a.m. I just woke up, we're in New Orleans. I'd completely forgotten they had left the day before for a cruise, and since I was taking summer classes, I hadn't gone with them. We never figured out what was making those noises. The doors were still deadbolt from the inside, and the kitchen was spotless, just like my mom always keeps it. When I was about 10 years old, we were on holiday, and I spent every day at the local pool. There was a lifeguard there, probably in his early 20s, who was a little too friendly for my age. He often made comments about how I looked in my bathing suit. My friend and I were super innocent and just thought he was kind of strange, but didn't think much of it. On the last day of our holiday, the pool was crowded, and I was playing near the deep end. Suddenly, there's a big splash, and the lifeguard's face popped up right next to me, really close. I remember it so clearly. He smiled and said, "It's time." I instantly yelped, got out of the pool, and ran away, never going back again. At the time, I didn't understand what he meant by "it's time," but something deep inside me knew it was wrong. It wasn't until years later that I realized just how sinister and disturbing that moment was. I'm so grateful I trusted my instincts and ran. Our family vacation was planned for May. My family still lives in Texas, but I'm based in Colorado. Each year, we rent a cabin in the mountains for a week, a cozy base for tourist adventures, cooking out, and enjoying real s'mores and hot dogs. Classic mountain getaway vibes. This year, with the group being larger than usual, we needed a second car. I volunteered to be chauffeur along with my stepdad. I use my car a lot for work, so it gets plenty of wear and tear. Around January, though, I started having this recurring nightmare. I'm driving a car full of people through the mountains, and something fails, the brakes, the suspension, something, and we careen off the side of a cliff to our deaths. Sometimes it's a ravine, sometimes a river, sometimes snow is falling, sometimes the sun is shining. Each night the dream came back, with only slight variations. At first, I shrugged it off. Maybe I was just too high one night. But the dreams kept coming at least 3 times a week for 4 months straight. I was wound so tight, I felt like my neck was about to snap. Finally, I took my Jeep into the shop. They replaced nearly 40% of the suspension and brake system, which cost me $1,700, plus almost another $1,000 for new tires. Before this, I always trusted my little tank of a Jeep to handle any weather or road condition. I live on the Front Range, relatively flat ground, but now I felt invincible, like I was truly prepared. I finally slept well for a few nights, and then the dream returned. Vacation came and went with no nightmares. Then, on the second to last day, a storm brewed over the Rockies and started wreaking havoc. Our drive to the airport was supposed to take 3 hours, so I figured we'd leave a little early. But the snow forecast kept getting worse. 3 inches, then 8, then 12 to 18. My mom started getting anxious as she stared at the weather reports, which made me nervous too. That worry quickly spread to my brother. "Pops, what do you think?" my brother asked. Dad was blunt. "At this point, you've talked yourselves into it. We're not leaving yet, but you're going to get so worked up you'll decide to leave too late. So just go." Basically, Dad called us pussies. But he was right, and with Mom worried, we cooked an early dinner and decided to leave around 2 p.m. By 5 p.m., we were packed and ready, watching the clouds roll in. Our route required crossing Vail Pass or backtracking 4 hours down to Colorado Springs. The roads were wet with rain, not yet frozen, but snow was closing in. I kept the speed between 45 to 55 miles per hour. Then, 20 minutes before we hit the pass, authorities closed Vale Pass. What now? If the storm worsened, we didn't know how long it would take to get to the airport, and changing tickets would be ridiculously expensive. So, we rerouted through Highway 24 via Leadville, a less traveled path. I thought we could take it slow and steady, mile by mile. Big mistake. The storm dumped a foot of snow before we even got off the detour, climbing over 10,000 feet alongside all the other drivers rerouted from Vale Pass. What should have been a 3-hour drive stretched into 12 hours. I never exceeded 45 miles per hour in my 4WD Jeep, which normally weighs about 2,500 pounds. Packed with people and luggage, it was close to 2 tons. We only lost traction once, but I was terrified. Every quarter mile brought another scene straight from my nightmares. Snow-covered sharp curves, long right-hand bends beside icy rivers, sheer cliffs dropping off into endless switchbacks. I was tense for so long that when I finally crashed around 1 a.m., every muscle ached. I had back cramps for days and couldn't even bend my legs properly. But I made it. I beat fate. And I've learned one thing for sure. I will never, ever temper again. I was about 8 years old, on vacation at the beach with my brother. We were having a blast, splashing around and enjoying the water. But as the sun started to set, out of nowhere my dad yells at us to get out of the water, fast, and sprint back to the little apartment we were staying in. Confused, we asked why. All he said was one word: horseflies. Cut to just a minute later, all of us were bolting as fast as we could, dodging those giant, terrifying bugs. They buzzed loudly like angry helicopters and seemed like they were hell-bent on ripping our skin off. My 8-year-old self definitely made the whole scene feel even more intense, but damn, those horseflies were absolutely terrifying. My cousin and I both have a huge passion for all things horror and paranormal. At the time, he was living in a 2-story house in the hilly, wooded outskirts of Valdosta, Georgia, with his parents, younger sister, and brother. We stopped there to caravan with them on our way to a family reunion in Dothan, Alabama. The night we arrived, my cousin and I got caught up swapping all the creepy paranormal stories and horror discoveries we collected since we last saw each other. Eventually, we ended up in his attic den, the only room on the 2nd floor. It was carpeted and had a chair, a computer, a daybed, a TV, and his gaming consoles. What made it weird, though, were the 4 recessed movable panels built into the walls, each hiding small storage spaces. That visit was the first time I ever slid one of those panels open to see what was behind it. Later that night, we convinced my aunt to let us rent a horror movie on his Xbox 360 using her credit card, right there in the attic room. Side note, the movie was Spanish, about a family who moved into a house with a backyard maze centered around a well. I don't remember much else. If anyone knows it, please tell me. The movie ended around 2:30 a.m. and we were wiped out, so we decided to crash in the attic. My cousin flipped the TV to a documentary about Alaska while I tried to get some sleep on the daybed. A few minutes later, out of nowhere, we heard a strange sound, like a deep, long, rattly, raspy breath coming from behind the daybed. The daybed was pressed against the wall where 2 of those secret storage compartments sat. My cousin slowly turned to me with a look like he'd just seen a ghost and quietly asked if I heard it too. I had. Needless to say, we barely got any sleep after that. We still talk about that night because there are no vents or anything in that attic room that could have made that noise. Even now, just remembering it sent a chill down my spine. There's a weird trend in the UK for a while where people dressed up as clowns and just stood on street corners staring at passersby. It didn't sound that scary until one night when I was walking home. It was already dark early, and there was a clown standing right on the corner of my street. I actually said out loud, "No," and immediately turned around. Instead of taking the usual route, I ended up cutting through people's gardens just to sneak in through my back door. No way was I sticking around near that creepy clown. I deliver blood to hospitals, sometimes in the middle of the night when the halls are mostly empty, usually during emergencies. One night, because of renovations, I had to take a different elevator than usual. I went up to the right floor and thought I could cut through another department to get where I needed to go. When the elevator doors opened, I almost lost it. I stepped into a massive room, completely dark except for one faint light slipping out from under a door at the far end. From that door came eerie screaming and wailing. Nope. Instant flashback to Kingdom Hospital vibes. I hadn't even stepped off the elevator yet before I slammed the button for the ground floor and hurried right back to where I started. No way was I sticking around there. I once had a patient weighing over 400 pounds who decided, after years of immobility, that he wanted to walk on his own. He had serious issues with both legs, couldn't tolerate being off oxygen, and had a Foley catheter. Around 3 a.m., he rang his call bell. When I got to his room, I found him sitting on the floor, legs folded beneath him, holding his Foley, with blood and urine everywhere. He told me he wanted to take a stroll down the hall after resting for a bit, and then promptly collapsed face first onto the floor. It took 6 of us just to get him back up to a kneeling position so we could secure his upper body into a Hoyer lift. 2 people had to act as counterbalance when the lift started tipping forward. 3 swung him back onto the bed, and 4 rolled him onto his back. Throughout all of this, he was fighting us, yelling that we were taking away his freedom. That was the last day I worked on MedSurg. Now I work with newborns. Their diapers are smaller, and they don't throw themselves out of their cribs for no reason. I was pretty new to dating after coming out of a long-term relationship, so naturally, I jumped on Tinder. I matched with a guy who was a bit odd, but somehow I was intrigued. His conspiracy theories were oddly amusing. We went on a couple of dates. He kissed me on the first one, which felt a little rushed, but I was curious enough to go along with it. A few days later, we met at a busy bar. I was sipping a vodka soda, taking it easy, while he downed Long Island iced teas like there was no tomorrow. As the night wore on, he got sloppy, and the conversation turned to his strained relationship with his mom. Way too much information for someone I barely knew. He eventually walked me to my car, and we started making out. At first, it was fine, but soon it felt forced, uncomfortable. He kept dropping hints about coming back to my place, and I was absolutely not into it. I remember feeling detached, but also panicked as he kissed my neck. That's when I noticed the parking lot was eerily empty, despite just leaving a busy bar. I started slowly pushing him away so I could leave. He caught on and snapped at me. This guy was at least 8 inches taller and 70 pounds heavier. I told him I was tired, jumped into my car, locked the doors, and sped off. Nervously, I kept checking my rearview mirror, terrified he might be following. I thought I was being smart by meeting him in a crowded public place. I'm usually confident and in control, but in that parking lot, I felt completely powerless and terrified. That gut, oh hell no moment hit hard, and even now, remembering how vulnerable I felt makes me sick. I was out hunting rabbits with some friends when we started noticing blood spots in the snow. At first, we thought it was no big deal. But then things took a dark turn. We'd only managed to catch 2 rabbits, and after tracking the blood trail for about a mile, we stumbled upon 3 deer, completely shredded. Nearby, we found massive cat tracks, way bigger than a cougar's. The scratch marks suggested it wasn't just one animal, but maybe 2 or 3 big cats. That was enough for us to call it a day. We stayed alert, constantly watching to make sure those cats weren't stalking us as we made our way out. Needless to say, we never hunted or camped in that area again. Whatever it was, those prints were far too large to be any ordinary cougar. One night, around 2 a.m., I went for a walk along the train tracks with my ex and her 2 brothers to smoke a fat joint. This was near the end of my relationship with her. I thought we were still on good terms, but I soon found out we definitely weren't. When we reached the train bridge over the gorge, I caught my ex and her brothers exchanging some serious looks. That's when it hit me. This was the spot where they planned to kill me and dump my body. I didn't stick around to find out. I bailed hard and ran back to my friend's place before they could make a move. Not long after, I packed my things and left my ex for good. Looking back, I still can't believe I put myself in such a dangerous situation. I was out with my friends, walking up a hill when I decided to run ahead. That's when I saw a man getting up off the ground. He started staring right at us, and something just didn't feel right. I ran back to my friends and warned them to run. We managed to hide in a nearby playground until our parents came to pick us up. Even though we kept going back to that same area, strange things always seemed to happen whenever we were there. My mom had a boyfriend who was abusive, but she didn't pay much attention because he would smother her with love sometimes. One day, things got scary when he left bruises on us. We decided to leave the house and called our Aunt Priscilla. She came to pick us up. When my mom's boyfriend showed up, he started arguing with my aunt. I was watching when suddenly he pulled a gun out of his car. My mom immediately jumped into the driver's seat and sped off while he was ramming into our aunt's car. We had to drive on the sidewalk to get away, and he followed us closely. Luckily, we were near the police station. My mom waited until he gave up and left. Later, he was found and arrested after police noticed bullet holes inside the house from his anger. After that, my mom took us to stay with our grandma until she could find a safe place for us all. A few years ago, I broke into an abandoned building complex to take photos. The police knew I was inside, and they started shining their car lights into the building, probably trying to find me or scare me out. I pressed my back against the wall, hoping the light would move on. Then, the beam swept across a doorway and revealed someone standing there, staring right at me. I've never run that fast in my life. A few years ago, my son was away on a business trip, so I ordered dinner from a local chain. When the delivery guy showed up, he unexpectedly insisted, angrily, that he had to come inside my apartment to hand over the food. This guy was nothing like the usual delivery people, scruffy, unkempt, and downright rude. Normally, I'm pretty polite and would let things slide, but something about him set off alarm bells. I firmly told him no way was he coming inside. He argued, but I stood my ground. Eventually, he left in a huff. I slammed the door, triple locked it, and spent the rest of the night eating pasta, feeling completely creeped out. One night, my friend, and I were heading back from a concert and decided to take a shortcut through a construction zone. It was late, the streets were closed off, and there was hardly anyone around. As we crossed a small bridge, I suddenly looked up and saw what looked like a zombie rat lunging right at my face. It totally freaked me out. Turns out someone had taken a dried up rat or squirrel, wired it to hang midair on the bridge, making it look alive. Between that creepy thing and the eerie, deserted vibe of the construction site, we didn't stick around. We booked it until we hit a busy street. This happened about 30 years ago in Nambour, Queensland, Australia. I was a teenager with my learner's permit, but I was the only sober person in the car. Everyone else was completely drunk and being a major distraction. I ended up blowing through a red light, and a cop pulled me over. As a learner, I was allowed to drive, but I needed a fully licensed and sober driver supervising me, which clearly wasn't the case. I explained to the officer, "I'm sober." "They're not, and we're just going to a friend's place right down the road." The officer, using his judgment, decided it was best to have a sober person driving. He said, "Right, get off then. If I see you on the road in half an hour, you're arrested." So, I drove the carload of drunk friends to the house and parked. True to his word, about 30 minutes later, the cop drove by, saw the car in the driveway, and us on the balcony. He gave a quick chirp of his siren and a wave, and we waved back. All was well. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and we will see you in the next video.